Margs with MS-13. We have the latest in the Abrego Garcia case and Democrats' actions to try and bring him back. And is David Hogg Republicans' new midterm savior? We cover that and so much more today on 10-Minute Drill.
Everybody get up, get up.
The story of America is the story of an adventure.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
We are a nation under God, and I believe God intended for us to be free.
Over the weekend, Democrat Senator Chris Van Hollen posted photos of a long-awaited meeting with deported illegal immigrant Abrego Garcia. The pictures were surprisingly intimate, and they did include margaritas on the table. Not every Democrat was pleased with Chris Van Hollen's work here. One Democrat told Axios, Trump is setting a trap for the Democrats, and like usual, we're falling for it. Here's what Gavin Newsom said.
Conviction, but this is part of what we have to do and not get distracted with distractions.
And Mo Ellethy, longtime Democrat strategist, said this.
We don't know all of the details about this guy, so let's not make him a martyr.
One thing that's particularly notable about the latest in this flap is that Democrats have shifted some of their messaging from say his name, and this is a beloved Maryland father, to details about him and his background don't matter, which made it all the more interesting when Chris Van Hollen went on TV and didn't have answers to some of the most basic questions you would have expected.
Can you say with absolute certainty that he is not, nor has he ever been, a member of the MS-13 gang? And did you ask him point blank?
Dana, what Donald Trump is trying to do here is change the subject.
You didn't ask him?
I didn't ask him that because I know what his answer is. And Donald Trump is trying to change the subject.
Saying that Trump is trying to change the subject by bringing up the identity of this person and talking about his criminal history is a pretty good way of showing that you didn't necessarily think out this entire play. He also was pressed on who paid for his trip.
Who did pay for this trip?
This was an officially cleared, congressional trip, cleared on a bipartisan basis. Yes, like every other trip.
The reality is, from the time that Chris Van Hollen got on a plane and headed to El Salvador, the facts about Garcia's case have gotten worse and worse. We know that 2 immigration judges have found the evidence that he was a member of MS-13 to be credible. We've also heard reports now that he was likely involved in human trafficking, and his wife filed a protective order against him, claiming multiple times that he was abusive. He violently attacked her, ripped her shirt, choked her, punched her, including a time when she was holding their infant son. So as we're learning more and more about him, you have seen that shift from Democrats saying, it's not about him, it's not about his identity, but to most normal people who want violent criminals who are not citizens of our country to be deported, that's the entire story. But as some Republicans have started to say, those facts need to be entered in court. Here's Senator John Kennedy.
Look, this was a screw-up, in my opinion. The administration won't admit it, but this was a screw-up. Mr. Garcia was not supposed to be sent to El Salvador.
Now, the issue here that Republicans like Senator John Kennedy have started to raise is those facts about Garcia can't simply be litigated in the media or in social media. A district judge in the Supreme Court have called on the White House to facilitate Garcia's release from prison to ensure that his case is handled in the way that it would have been if he had not been sent to El Salvador. With a few simple steps, whether it is bringing Garcia back, putting him in front of a judge and making that new case, if they take some of those simple steps, they can win on the politics, which we know that they're already winning on, but they can also win on the law. And the most likely outcome is he will still end up being deported. This will allow them, as I said, to win on the politics, which favor Republicans and make Democrats look crazy for defending a member of MS-13, but also in terms of the law, which really is important. But this does highlight a much bigger problem with the system. Some have pointed to, deportations the last several years have worked fine because we've deported about 350,000 people a year. But when you consider that Joe Biden allowed in 10 million illegal immigrants under his watch, in many ways facilitated bringing them into our country, that 350,000 deportations a year means we wouldn't even get the immigrants that came in under Joe Biden out for about 28 years. And when we see polls that show that about 60% of the country wants all illegal immigrants that are in the country right now to be deported.
Deport all undocumented immigrants. Voters favoring the government trying to deport all 11 million of them. Back in 2016, just 38% of voters wanted the government to try to deport all 11 million undocumented immigrants. Compared to where we are in 2025, 56%, the majority. The American people have come a long way on this issue, much closer to Donald Trump.
That would take about 57 years. So when you tell people that we can't do the very basic things they want to make their own neighborhoods more safe for 57 years, they start to take real issue with the system around them. The last point that I would make on this is it's really important, as we always talk about, to follow the money. There is a giant cottage industry of left-wing dark money groups that solely exist to help illegal immigrants avoid deportations, no matter how dangerous they may be. And in many cases, they train them to abuse the asylum system to claim that they're in danger. There are a few simple things they have to say at ports of entry to allow them to be in, to allow them to claim asylum and avoid deportation, even if they fit the mold of the exact type of person 90% of the country want to be deported. These groups are funded by people like George Soros. So again, George Soros at one point is funding these rogue prosecutors that want to get rid of all crime laws. They are the soft on crime prosecutors that have destroyed cities like San Francisco. At the same time, he's also funding these efforts to make it impossible to ever deport the most dangerous criminal illegal immigrants who have gotten in the country over the last several decades, particularly in the last 4 years under Joe Biden. That's a problem. Did the Democrat National Committee snub Joe Biden on Easter? It sure looks like it. They posted pictures of some of their favorite recent Democrat presidents, and they left out our friend Joe Biden, and I can't imagine why they wouldn't want some of these pictures and video. We do know what Joe Biden was up to. Here's a picture with his family that does look a little bit weirdly photoshopped, but I would imagine is likely real. I do think it's incredibly notable that today's Democrat Party, including the staffers running their social media, feel more fondness towards Jimmy Carter, one of the worst presidents in our history, than they feel about Joe Biden. Rough. The latest on the future liberals want. The Washington Post ran a very interesting piece from a freelance writer in California who subbed all of her gas-powered appliances in for electric, hoping that the efficiency guidance on each of those appliances would lead to lower electric bills. The result? Her utility bills doubled. And she went to a financial advisor for guidance, to an expert about how to bring down those costs. What he told her was simply use less electricity. Now, again, this is the future that liberals want. We have talked about this issue before with things like the Biden Dream House, which highlighted how everything in your home got more expensive under Joe Biden's rules, regulations, and appliance bans. And then we had the Trump Dream House, which showcased how those costs came back down and you are allowed to keep the appliances you actually like. We know from extensive polling that people prefer the appliances that they have and they want that choice. But again, as this writer found for us, the future that liberals want is a bleak one with less access and more expensive costs. Republicans may have a new midterm savior. Historically, the party in power after a presidential election where one party wins the White House, the House, and Senate has a very tough midterm cycle. That has been the historical cycle for a very, very long time. However, Republicans feel they may have a new savior in David Hogg. David Hogg is known for saying a lot of crazy and colorful things like this.
For them, because we go out there as Democrats all the time and say democracy is the most important thing. We have to defend democracy. We fail to acknowledge that this generation, democracy is what put us through school shooter drills and school shootings. It's what's put us through the climate crisis and so much more.
But you'll also remember earlier this year, Democrats made a unique deal and allowed David Hogg to become the vice chair of their party in hopes of re-energizing their sort of weak relationships with younger voters. But David Hogg has just announced a $20 million project to unseat incumbent Democrats that he believes are not doing enough to oppose President Trump. You can imagine the Democrat Party leadership is up in arms. A lot of people have come out and condemned this. And he tried to defend it on TV yesterday and had a very rough time of it.
You heard Hakeem Jeffries. He actually seemed a little irritated with you or with the effort. He's like, I think we should focus on beating Republicans, not on beating Democrats.
I think it's going to be a hell of a lot harder for us to defeat Republicans with a 27% approval rating.
I think I speak for a lot of Republicans when I say if there is a fund to chip into to support David Hogg, perhaps on some kind of national tour where he can stand with Democrats across the country, I would be willing to support that. That is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us for 10 Minute Drill. Please subscribe on YouTube. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.